Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, family and friends. And I want to wish you, first of all, a happy Rosh Chodesh. It's very auspicious to have an occasion on Rosh Chodesh. And I want to welcome all of you to my very first book launch. And I thank you, Howard, so much for that beautiful introduction, because it's an honor and a joy to be your friend. And I am very certain that I wouldn't be here right now if it weren't for your wise counsel. I'd also like to thank Katie Zontek, the JCC Cultural Director, for her indispensable work in making this program a reality. Katie, I feel fortunate to have had the benefit of your expertise in all these things, arranging publicity, organizing the technology, as well as all the countless details that went into the planning of this event. And I want to give a special thanks to Jim Mahobian, who is the Chief Communications and Technical Officer of the JCC. He's been indispensable too. So, I want to show you the image, the full image of the Western Wall in Jerusalem. It's a painting by Esther Toussaint. Now, when my publishing editor asked me if I had in mind a cover image for my book, I told him I was thinking in terms of a world map, since the Jews in diaspora have been literally all over the globe. But he said that maps were for travel writing. I have to think of something else. So I started to give it some thought. I said, is there a visual locus associated with the Jewish diaspora? And I realized it was the Western Wall, because throughout the centuries, wherever Jews have been, they faced the wall to pray, to Jerusalem, to the site of the destroyed temple where only a wall remained. So then I started looking at photographs of the wall, but so many of them showed only the men's section, and I wanted female representation. And right at this time, as if it was hashgacha prati, if it was a hand of destiny, I received this small replica of Esther's painting, and it was from a Jewish organization, the Children's Village of Jerusalem. You may have gotten it too. And as you can see in this rendition, there are men and women and children in this scene, and it not only includes an extended view of the wall, but it shows the hills of Jerusalem. So her email was on it, and I contacted her, and she let me purchase the rights to use the painting for my book cover, and I wanted you to get a chance to see the full representation. It's beautiful, isn't it? Now, the journey to this book has been quite an odyssey. It began with my pursuit of a Ph.D. in Comparative Studies at Florida Atlantic University. I wanted to do something special with my senior moments, heaven help me, and getting a Ph.D. was certainly that. It was an uphill climb because I managed to take the GREs. There was a 5-year cutoff, and even before I did the math review, I said, 1965 to 2011. I think it's more than 5 years. Then I had to get my 1967 master's thesis out of my archives in the garage. It had like a rust stain from a paper clip. It had been typed. There was no such thing as a computer file. I had to go summon up these ancient transcripts from the university at Buffalo because there had been no computers, and that was an effort in itself. But wonder of wonders, I was accepted into the 2013 cohort. So the first requirement for all of us entering this program was a course called Postcolonial Theory. Now, at the time, my daughter, Raquel, who many of you know, was a recent Master of Library Science graduate from University at Buffalo. And she got very parental. She said, now, Mom, you have to open your email. It's never too early to get married to your email. I said, Raquel, it's only June. I'm not going back to school till August. What is the point? And she looked I went, whatever. So we opened up the email, she got it started, and there was a message from the professor who was teaching this post-colonial theory course, and there was a reading list attached. I will never forget the shock. Raquel opened the reading list. There were 26 books. I went, but that was the end of my summer vacation. And so as I'm sitting there, Raquel says, okay, Mom, now it's time. We go online and we order these books. I said, what happened to the bookstore? Isn't there a bookstore? She goes, oh, that's only a last resort. So she taught me how to look for the books and used and getting the bargains and whatever. Well, I have to tell you, they started arriving and I began reading, and the Amazon truck came to our home so often that my husband Gary said to me, "Do you have something going on with the Amazon guy?" I said, "No." So basically, post-colonial theory, or PCT as it's affectionately known, it looks at history through the prism of the colonial experience, which is imperialism, colonization, the pursuit of empire, the colonized, all of the above. And we had exactly one assignment in this course. It was the end of the semester, a 20-page paper that would relate our dissertation topic to post-colonial theory. I said, "I don't know." I had already decided I was going to focus my dissertation on some aspect of the Jewish life story narrative. I'll get into more of that later. I have a business that I do them. But what would PCT have to do with it? So I started reading literally through thousands of pages of the 26 assigned texts, and I'm noticing that a lot of attention is devoted to diaspora. So it turns out that the concept is biblical. This is a quote from Deuteronomy, and I'm going to read it. "If you do not observe and fulfill all the law, the Lord will scatter you among all the peoples from one end of the earth to the other. And among these nations you will find no peace, no rest for the sole of your foot. Then the Lord will give you an unquiet mind, dim eyes, and a failing appetite. Your life will hang continually in suspense. Fear will beset you night and day, and you will find no security all your life long." And that's what happened. Well, the interesting thing was that before I even knew the term diaspora, I was actually thinking about it, and I can remember being about 7 and reading Jewish Bible stories in some storybooks my mother had given me, and I just couldn't put the pieces together. We were living in Ohio. My extended family lived in New York City. My grandfather had come from Poland. Here was a story about Moses. He was leading the Jews somewhere, promised land, a desert, and what had happened. And also, with the confusion came the other people and places connected with the Jewish holidays. Moses had been born in Egypt. Esther had lived in Persia. Somehow the Syrians and the Greeks were involved in Hanukkah. And I couldn't put it together. And searching for those explanations, it became part of a quest for my own place in the Jewish saga. And my post-colonial studies turned out to be the key to finding the answers. So in post-colonial studies, we talk a lot about colonialism because post-colonial means after colonialism. And here by a post-colonial theorist, Anya Lumba, is a very succinct definition of colonialism. It's the conquest and control of other people's lands and goods. And this colonial encounter, and listen for the familiar saga, involved a wide range of practices including trade, plunder, negotiation, warfare, genocide, enslavement, and rebellions. Sound familiar, huh? Now, she also mentioned something was very important to my study. A lot of people start the post-colonial era with 1492, when Columbus set out with lots of other people. But she argued, and I agreed with her, that global flows and world system existed well before the Spaniards began colonizing the New World, not only in the Americas, but throughout the Mediterranean, that's us, South Asia, and East Asia. It was about at this point that I realized that the Jewish people were the poster children for post-colonial theory, because during our thousands of years of exile, we had experienced diaspora, expulsion, colonization, marginalization, genocide. I like to call it, in the words of Zorba the Greek, the whole catastrophe. Now, if we look at this map of the global Jewish population, the more populated areas are darker and the others are lighter. But as you can see, there's blue all over the place. And the diaspora has extended to just about every corner of the globe. Now, I have to add that the Jewish diaspora in Jewish teachings is referenced as an exile. They didn't use the word diaspora. They used the word exile, and in Hebrew it's galut, and you might have heard it in Yiddish, gullus. That's how it's referred to. And Our Jewish diaspora is actually divided into 4 different exiles. Now, I go through these in my book at length, but I'm just going to cover them. The Egyptian exile, which was the movie The Ten Commandments, occurred well over 3,000 years ago. And the Babylonian exile, which is our holiday of Purim, was just about 2,500 years ago with the destruction of the first temple. That was only about 70 years long. And then came the Greek-Syrian exile, which we call an exile, but post-colonial theory would call it a colonization because the Jews never left the land. They were colonized. And that was followed shortly thereafter by the Roman exile. And in the Jewish national anthem, Hatikva, we always mention the hope. And the hope is that our exile came to an end in 1948, a 2,000-year exile. It's the only time in history it has ever happened. I would like to say it's miraculous. So, as Howard has mentioned in his excellent introduction, my book examines 5 contemporary diasporic life story narratives recorded in the form of video interviews. And I employed 21st century technology to uncover and discover what was the Esther moment in the 5 individual journeys. So, what exactly is this Esther moment and where did it originate? Well, as you may have guessed, it's found in the biblical book of Esther, which the late British Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks termed a paradigm of diasporic life. Now, the book of Esther was co-authored by Esther and Mordecai, and it stands as what we like to call a proto or a pre-autobiographies. Most autobiographies are written in the first person, I, but some autobiographies are written in the third person, he, she, they, Esther, and Esther is one of those. Now, let's take a little look at Esther. I'm going to summarize this very, very briefly because I could spend a whole hour on the book of Esther. Esther is chosen to be the queen of Ahasuerus, who in secular terms is known as Xerxes, and she has a relative, Mordecai, who is holds a high up position in a Persian government, and he advises her to don't say you're Jewish and don't say you're related to me, because they just didn't know how everything would fall out. But as it came out, Esther won the hearts of all she meet, and she wins and she becomes the queen. Well, things weren't going so well for Mordecai because there was another person who was a very high prominent head of state, and his position allowed him to have people bow down before him when they were at the king's gate. Well, Mordecai, who was known to be Jewish and accepted as such, he refused to bow down. This absolutely incensed this official, whose name was, you might have guessed, Haman, and Haman went to the king and said, I want to get rid of all these Jews. They're just too much trouble. And he got permission to annihilate all the Jewish people. Well, when Mordecai heard this, he sent word to Esther and he said, look, you have got to go to the king and appeal. You've got to appeal for a mercy to rescind this order. And she got back to him and she said, well, you know, I haven't been summoned for 30 days, and to appear before the king without being summoned, it can be an offense punishable by death. And Mordecai says to her, listen, don't think because you're in the palace that you're going to escape this fate. And secondly, maybe this is why everything worked out for you to be queen, so that it's time to step up and help your people. So Esther contemplates it, and she says, you know what? I'm in. I'm going to do it. No matter what, I am going to do it. And she actually has Mordecai have the Jews fast for her in preparation. But meanwhile, she utters the famous words, if I perish, I perish. She's in no matter what. It's a life and death commitment. Well, she appears before the king, and luckily he extends that golden royal scepter, and she gets permission to enter. And without going into details, She ultimately reveals her Jewish identity. She pleads for her people. She lays the blame on Haman, and she gains permission for the Jews to defend themselves against this genocidal military attack, which they successfully do. Haman winds up getting hanged on the gallows he'd built for Mordecai, and Mordecai is elevated to an even higher position in the government. So the wheel of fortune turned in favor of the Jews. Now, eventually, Esther and Mordecai co-author an account of the events, and it makes its way into the canon of biblical writings. It was the last book accepted into that canon. And I just can't resist adding that when Esther successfully pitched her eponymous book to the elders of Zion, not only did she not perish, she published. So, I always make sure that when I am talking about Esther and Mordecai, I do a reality check for my audience. This is the kever, this is the tomb, the real tomb of Esther and Mordecai in Iran. It, for many millennia, was a national historical site because Esther is not only a Jewish heroine, she's the wife of one Persian king, Ahasuerus Xerxes, and she's the mother of another, Darius. So, the Esther moment, which is signaled by that if I perish commitment, it expresses this high level of acknowledging her Jewishness, identifying as part of the Jewish people, regardless of the risk. Well, the 5 people I interviewed did not have quite these life and death decisions to make, but the Esther moment for them was when they find their Jewish spark. And what happens in all the variations in many different ways is that discovery and commitment shapes and alters their life courses. And it makes them a part of the Jewish people and the Jewish destiny. And I consider it a spiritual return to Israel as significant as a physical homecoming to the land. Now, in the time span between the book of Esther and today, autobiography, as Howard has referred to, has undergone a tremendous metamorphosis. Esther's was a handwritten scroll, and then there was, of course, the Gutenberg Bible. Esther made the cut. Not exactly our Esther, but still Esther. And by the way, that Gutenberg Bible publication of her story went viral. That's what happened. All of a sudden, it was out there. And now we have 21st century videography. Now, these are my people, and I'm only going to go into a little detail on one of them, but Isaac was born in Baghdad. Isaac was born in Shanghai. Zmira was born in Baghdad. Jay was born in Rouen, France. Rachel was born in Canada. And finally, Sybil was born in the United States, in New York City. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Isaac. Isaac's family originated in Iraq, and there has been a Jewish community in Iraq for over 2,500 years. There was a community even before the destruction of the first temple. But as these different conquests happened, the Iraqi community got bigger and bigger. It was a solid community, 2,500 years old. I'm going to show you Isaac's journey because he was born in Shanghai. How did his parents get to Shanghai? Well, his father had been sent there as a representative of the wealthy Iraqi Sassoon family. They are the founders of HSBC Bank, and actually Isaac visited. The branch exists in Shanghai to this very day. So it gets better. Isaac's mother was born in India because that's where her parents had been sent to manage the Sassoon business. And directed by the Sassoons, Isaac's mother's family had relocated to Shanghai, and that's where his parents met. And the Iraqi community lived very close to one another. They worshiped together. They had a synagogue. They often married into each other's families. Now, I'm going to fast forward to 1948. Isaac and his family is still in Shanghai. But when Israel was founded in 1948, their Iraqi passports were revoked. When the state of Israel was founded, the Iraqis did not want Jews to have Iraqi passports. So the family members were considered stateless alien residents. And what happened was an Israeli shaliach, a representative from Israel, the very newly found state, was sent over to Shanghai to write them visas because they couldn't just get on an airplane and go directly to Israel, for which they would not need visas or passports, as we know. They had to take a ship from Shanghai to San Francisco, and then they had to be put on a sealed train because this visa was only good for them to go to Israel. So they were on a sealed train all the way across, and then when they got to New York, they transferred to another ship, and this ship went to Italy, and from Italy they boarded a ship for Haifa. Now, when they got there, Isaac was literally drafted into the Israeli army as he got off the ship. His family didn't even know where he was for 2 weeks. And he has a picture of himself in a hat from the French Foreign Legion because the Israeli army berets didn't arrive until months later. So what happened was they were in Israel, and it's very complex, it's complicated, and it's in my book, but they just didn't find, the brothers and Isaac didn't find the commercial opportunities that they were looking for. And because they had been educated in British-controlled Shanghai, they were fluent in English. So it was very simple for them to decide to emigrate to the United States. So in the United States, Isaac met and married a young American Jewish woman. Actually, she was a biology Ph.D. And they decided they were going to raise their 2 sons in a kosher, Sabbath-observant household, and they made the decision to send them to Jewish day school. Isaac now has grandsons in the Israeli army, P.S. But the other thing was that Isaac stayed very true to his values because he was offered a lot of different positions in his company, but he would have had to have worked on Saturday. And he said, "I'm sorry, I can't work on Saturday." So he stayed true to everything, and I think, well, one son is my husband's physician, and one son is a rabbi. And the children are all, some of them are more Zionistic than others. So let's look at the journey of Isaac's family, because it's very interesting. They practically circumnavigated the globe, because originally the family was from Iraq, and they went to India, Shanghai, and then ultimately they got back to Israel. And as you can see, the reddish line denotes Isaac's mother's journey, which began in India, and his father's journey is the green line, which began in Baghdad and ended in Israel. And Isaac's journey, the blue line, had an added leg going back from Israel to the United States. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into this. This is so involved and so technical, but I go through it in my book. There are common features in diaspora. I just want to tell you one interesting thing about Isaac. If you look at number 8, a sense of empathy and co-responsibility with co-ethnic members in other countries of settlement, even where home has become more vestigial. During World War II, if you remember, there were a few Eastern European Jews who escaped to Shanghai. They were put in a separate location from Isaac's family, but Isaac's family and all the other Iraqi families were extremely helpful to them. They did everything and anything they could. They got them food, they shared their synagogue, they got them clothes, they did absolutely everything. They did not know anything, they never knew them, they aren't the same different traditions with Eastern European Jews, but they were Jews. And the Iraqi community stepped up and they helped them. They helped them with, oh my gosh, medicine and medical supplies and just everything they possibly could. So I'm not going to go into all the others. Now, this is me on my website talking about a heritage biography. And it was a very important part of my book. I had to capture these life story narratives, and to do that, I employed the interview technique I use in my business, and I'm going to play, I hope I'm going to play, Jim, a short clip from my website, which is hbiboca.com, and this will explain the process. Do I just click on it?
Yeah, I think so.
Here goes. Welcome to the world of heritage biography, where every life is a story. Hello, I'm Elaine Mendelow, founding director, here to tell you more. A heritage biography is a life story interview, professionally photographed, either in the comfort of your own home or in a recorded Zoom session. Your session can be scheduled for the morning, afternoon, evening, whatever is most convenient for you. Now, let's take a closer look at the whole process step by step. Often, a heritage biography starts as a surprise, a gift from children or a spouse to mark a special birthday or an anniversary. It can be emailed as well as sent through the U.S. Postal Service. And with your gift certificate comes an outline. In chronological order, it gives you a chance to refresh your memory by writing down the people and events of your life, names of parents, grandparents, siblings, schools, war experiences, children, and much more. Looking at photos, you can also arrange family photographs to be included, as well as mementos or family heirlooms. When you've finished, you are ready to call and schedule your interview. Choose a flattering outfit for your big moment in front of the camera. After all, you'll be seen for posterity. And now for the actual interview. In the comfort of your home, you will be able to shine as you tell the unique details of your life story. That's simple. Should you wish, we can also provide you with a transcript of your interview as well as a written autobiography in the form of a first-person narrative. Let us create a heritage biography for you or someone you love, a precious family legacy for the generations to come. We look forward to hearing from you. Okay, so that's the process. Welcome. Now, what I do is I give these people who are going to be interviewed, I give them a chronological outline. And what I have found is an interesting phenomenon. Writing the answers, a lot of them say, oh, just interview me, I know writing the answers unleashes the floodgates of memory. I had one man who remembered his grandmother's maiden name. Like he said, I couldn't think of it when I was writing, but I wrote, and then all of a sudden I remembered her maiden name. So they remember details, and these details are very rich because these are the details that they alone can share. So these are the categories, the main categories: roots, this is your life, love and marriage, military experience, on the streets where you've lived, career moves, travels, health, religion and Israel, words of wisdom, meaningful mementos, favorite things, hobbies for posterity. Some of them are more relevant than others to individual people. For instance, military. Some people haven't had any military experience. But the one that I find that is so meaningful and important is the first one called Roots. And when I interview, I ask people, especially if they're Jewish, what is their name? And do you know who you were named after? Because this is often a very important detail in tracing their Jewish ancestry. And then we get into the parents. We talk about their occupation. We also try to keep a record. This is when they write it down. I don't expect them to know it from the top of their head. When were they born? When did they pass away? Where were they born? We get into what are your memories of these older relatives. Sometimes they remember grandparents, great-grandparents. And we go into their nationalities. And then we go into, the mother's maiden name and her date of birth. And they can talk about any aunts and uncles they have. I have to say that I'm not Barbara Walters when I do these interviews. If somebody has a brother, sister, sibling who they haven't spoken to in 20 years, I don't go, now that brother you haven't spoken to in 20 years, what happened? No, but for the sake of posterity, I say to them, now you have a brother 3 years younger than you, and he lives in Michigan. Yes, I have a brother 3 years younger. His name is John, and he lives in Michigan. That's all we do, because what I'm trying to help is down the road, when somebody's watching this, they'd be going, wait a minute, is this my family? And if you mention your siblings, then the person is able to identify. And sometimes there are times when people say something and they don't want it in, and you can't unring the bell, you just edit it. So it happens. It happens. So, As I've said, one last thing. The descriptions can be accompanied by photographs. The older the better, the more interesting. We can embed videos if you have them. It's just endless possibilities. Endless, and I mean endless. So I want to thank you so very much for your attention, and I hope that this talk has ignited your Jewish spark to create heritage biographies of yourselves and your families. I promise you, you're going to be very happy you did. Now, it's also very good. It can be in any medium, and if you have a handy child or grandchild for tech support, this is a very good way to get it done. It can be done individually on Zoom now. We've all had a little experience with that with the pandemic. But as I said, I hope you'll do it, because the motto of my company is, every life is a story worth telling. So, any questions? Yes.
Have you had any interaction with genetic services like 23andMe or Ancestry.com?
I don't go into that. If someone has done it, I have had people who've done extensive family trees. I have them talk about it, I have them show it, and I have them mention where it is stored. I don't do that part. My part is the raw interview. And I have had people say to me, well, you know, my children and grandchildren, they know my story. And you know what I say to them? I say, look, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to be around in 100 years. We're doing this, you know, everybody gets so excited, Ancestry.com, they find a leaf. Think how excited they'd be if they found a 2-hour interview of a great-grandparent talking about how and why and when their life story rolled out. So thank you for that question. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What about the other two interviews that you had done?
The other 4 interviews?
Yeah, 4.
Well, they're all in the book. I actually included not only a chapter reflecting on the interviews, but I included the actual transcript, so you can read it word for word for word. In order to get my, to hand it in as my dissertation, I actually made a private YouTube site so that my committee could go on and see the interview, see how it was done. But, and of course I have permission from all the people. Thank you for being so patient. Anyone have any more questions? I will be over there. You can ask me, and I have a card with my website because there's a lot more information on the website. Thank you so, so much.